One of the big trending topics that we are seeing in the ITAM space, especially when it comes to hardware, is DaaS, Device as a Service. So today we're going to look at exactly what DaaS is, why organizations are looking to move to this model, pros and cons, and what you as an ITAM professional need to know so that you can manage DaaS effectively. So hello and welcome back to the Sam Beast YouTube channel. As always, before we start, please don't forget to check down there, make sure you are subscribed, make sure you've liked this video. We've got loads of content coming in 2026 all around ITAM, and we'd hate for you to miss out. So make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss anything that we bring out in the coming months. So yeah, Device as a Service is something that's really starting to pick up a lot nowadays as organizations look to be a bit more flexible and a bit more agile about the hardware that they're providing, the terms that they're providing, and work some of that financial budgetary wizardry. What exactly is Device as a Service, or DaaS? Device as a Service is ultimately when you no longer own the physical hardware that you're getting from the reseller or manufacturer. Instead, very much like you might do on a mobile phone personally or a car contract, you are leasing that hardware asset for a defined period of time with a full contract wraparound. This contract will also include things like break fix, general repairs, replacements, and the guarantee that basically at the end of that particular subscription, they will send you the new model or a model that you've agreed to. It basically takes out that worry and that stress and that pressure and all of the work you have to do on hardware refreshing, because ultimately with Device as a Service, the hardware vendor gives you all that information anyway, tells you which devices are coming up for renewal, which ones need to be replaced, and then they work with you. They do a lot of the heavy lifting, in fairness, to give you the device, get the user up and running in a really quick space of time. Some DaaS services and contracts also include some of the core software that you need on that device. For example, the operating system and the level of operating system license that you will need as part of your standard software image. It may also include some other standard software on there. I know some device leasing companies allow you to get your M365 licenses through them and bundle it all up into one package, so hardware and core applications as well. Finally, what is typically covered under a DaaS service and a DaaS contract also includes that end of life element. So we've already touched upon it takes out the pressure of you having to do hardware refreshing and working all of that out. But what they actually do is they will take that ITAD element away from you. You may already have tweaked here that also means that takes away the ITAD benefits because you don't own the asset. But we'll touch upon that more later on. So the assets shift away from being something that you own within the organization to that subscription, vendor owned but vendor provided hardware model instead. However, there's still a lot of accountability that you as the customer have for these devices. You need to still know who has it, where it is in the life cycle. It still needs to be managed in your asset management database, etc. You can outsource a lot of the third-party support, but you can't outsource the responsibility and the risk, very much like with software and ITAM as a whole. Sure, you can get a third party involved to provide you a subscription service for your hardware, but again, the responsibility and risk still lies within your organization to ultimately optimize and utilize the hardware that you are getting under that particular DaaS agreement. You are also then thrown into the mix with the additional complication of needing to make sure that the contract terms and conditions are being met as part of that agreement. Obviously, if you buy something outright, you then have your warranty, you might have some additional extended support that you've purchased, but there's no overarching contract with terms and conditions that you need to make sure you're adhering to or that you need to be worried about. Things like if the device gets scratched because the user's done it, if it gets missing, if you return it early, there's all sorts of things that actually you need to manage and be aware of that you wouldn't have to if you purchase the hardware out. So why are some organizations moving to a DaaS model? One of the first things is the predictable cost element of it. You know how many devices are going to be on this leasing model. You know what the monthly costs are going to be, what the yearly costs are going to be, and how much that cost is going to be over 3, 5, 7, 10 years, however long you agree the contract. There's going to be no nasty surprises. There's going to be no significant bumps in the road as you go through. For example, if you've just gone in and started doing hardware refreshing, when you get to year 3 or year 4 of that cycle, you've then got that big outlay to replace everything you did 3 or 4 years ago. And in 3 or 4 years' time, you're going to have another big outlay, and that cycle's going to carry on with smaller amounts in between, then a big spike as you do your hardware refresh, and then smaller amounts again. Senior management, budget holders don't typically like that. They prefer the staggered consistent, relatively consistent hardware budgeting and hardware spending approach, which is why a DaaS model might be optimal for them. Predictable spend, consistent spend, you know where it's coming from, you know where it's going. Another reason as to why organizations are looking at this is because it changes the procurement method. So when you buy hardware and you own it, that's capex, that's a capital expense that comes out of your organization. Whereas on a leasing and a DaaS model, it is an operational cost, so it becomes OPEX. If you are having budget challenges with your capex budget, for example, a good way to ensure that your hardware refresh and your hardware lifecycle and your general hardware asset management isn't impacted as much is to change the budget to OPEX. We've seen a lot of organizations where CapEx has been under a lot of scrutiny. People have more OPEX budget, more flexibility, so then they need to move their hardware spend over into OPEX as an operating cost. So there may even be a push from your internal financial teams, your budget holders, your C-level, etc., to say, we really need to crack down on our CapEx and we've got more OPEX spend. We're buying a lot of hardware under CapEx, therefore let's move it into OPEX, and that's when the DaaS, device as a service, comes into play, because that is all operational cost. It is all OPEX. It is also worth remembering, however, that OPEX comes out of your bottom line and your profit and loss accounts, because it is a subscription and it's an operating cost. So there will be even more scrutiny on the budget that you're wanting for that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year budget for the hardware, and then validating and making sure that the hardware is being optimized. Because instead of being a capital asset that you can depreciate and get some money back for at the end of life, this is now coming out of your bottom line, and it is going to have a lot more eyes on it to validate that you are spending what you need to be spending, you're not overspending, and that people are leveraging the subscription of the hardware like they should be. Other reasons why people are doing this is a much easier way to simplify and standardize your hardware fleet and your hardware models. Very much again like a car, you'll go to one particular manufacturer and go, we need like a designer laptop, we need a VP laptop, we need a standard user laptop. You may need like a CAD or a social media type laptop who are using really heavy software, and straight away you have got one vendor and maybe 3 or 4 models that you're having under this leasing mechanism. Gone are the days of the hardware sprawling and having to support loads of different manufacturers, loads of different models and loads of different specs. You'll be able to standardize all of that through a DaaS agreement, and that you have the same spec, same models every single time for a particular user profile. We've touched on this loads of times before about building out your hardware convention, but this is a really good way of forcing you in order to do that, because there are very few DaaS agreements that typically with a middle person like a third party that will allow you to have a spread of different hardware vendors. Normally it is a standardized one hardware vendor, and here are the models and specs that we're providing you throughout the contract. And then they'll also provide you with that guarantee that once that model becomes end of sale, the following subsequent model is basically the same thing, just a newer iteration of it. Of course, you need to do all the hardware onboarding, make sure it's valid, make sure it's okay, all of that good stuff. But yeah, this is a really good way to streamline your hardware portfolio. It also makes hardware lifecycle management that bit easier. You're not having to go out and trying to find warranty information, building your own internal schedule, retirement dates, etc. The date is the date. It is what is in the contract, what you have agreed. It will be that cycle. You'll have a device for 3 years. You may have a 5-year life cycle on contract with DaaS. Whatever it is, it takes away you having to think about what your scheduled retirement dates are, what your warranty expiry dates are. It is all covered under that agreement. You also don't then have to worry about what is covered under a warranty. Whether you've just got a standard warranty here, a premier warranty over here, premium over here, Apple Care down there. Apple might be a different module, but you get what I mean. You don't have to worry about the different levels of additional support that you have. It is all covered under the agreement. Absolutely everything is covered under it typically. So if anything goes wrong with it, send a replacement. Someone loses a device, send a replacement. It really is that simple, and it takes a lot of that stress and that workload off of your local service desk engineers and off of ITAM as well, to make sure that you are tracking all of this. So if, for example, all of those dates you have for scheduled retirement and warranty, you can put your contract in the AMTB instead with the expiry date of that contract, and make sure it's the expenditure type is OPEX and that the procurement method is lease. DaaS, arguably is also quicker to provision. I hate to say it, but it typically is, right? You're not having to go through that whole procurement process, PO, quote, invoices, raising it in your procurement tools, getting approvals, ordering it, waiting for delivery, etc., etc. If you've got device as a service, the provisioning element of it is so much quicker because there's a lot less tape involved. You've already got that agreement in place, so if you need a new device, they'll just send you one. It'll even be pre-configured with your agreed image and your agreed software. There's then less workload on the local engineers. There's less workload on ITAM. The process comes a lot more streamlined and easier to follow. And from a provisioning standpoint, give DaaS its due. It is so much easier and quicker to provision an asset under a DaaS model than it is if you were purchasing it outright. There's a lot less steps to go through and a lot more time efficient process as well. However, there are cons to this as well, and things that you absolutely need to consider if you are thinking about this DaaS model. Number one is, in the long run, whilst it may seem cheap initially, in the long run, it may actually cost you more. That monthly, that yearly subscription, because you're bundling in all of the additional stuff, that flexibility, the swapping devices out, the additional support, all of that good stuff, it's going to cost you more. It typically will cost you more than just the hardware itself, but it typically also costs you more than the hardware plus maybe a premium support, a premier support, etc. Simply because it's an all-encompassing deal. Of course, you can negotiate this with your finance and procurement teams. If you are a larger organisation with a higher turnover of hardware assets, of course, there's deals to be done in there. But unfortunately, the physical hardware itself is seeing a price rise anyway, coming directly from the manufacturers due to the manufacturing cost increases, shortages for certain materials and chipsets, for example. I know it feels like we're back in 2020 again, but they are increasing their price in 2026 anyway for the physical hardware, and of course under a DaaS model those price increases will be passed on to you. No, the middle company or the hardware vendor themselves, they're not going to absorb those costs. You will with price increases. So please do take that into account when you are looking at DaaS and doing that financial forecasting to understand, yep, sure, it might be better because we're moving into OPEX, but ultimately this is the percentage difference between buying it outright and additional support or just buying it outright with standard warranty compared to over a 3 or 4 year life cycle for that particular device. And of course, factor in the fact that you won't get ITAM at the end of it, but we'll cover that one, don't we? There's also reduced flexibility when it comes to the hardware life cycle. You as the organisation unfortunately cannot determine that once you are in the agreement. For example, if for whatever reason the organisation wants to reduce the hardware budgeting in year 2 of a 5-year DaaS model, you cannot extend the life cycle of the assets to go, right, we're going to eke out another year of this one. As per your agreement, it might be a 3-year turnaround time for Windows devices, for example, 2 years for mobiles, 5 years for Macs, whatever you define. But you can't change that mid-contract. Or if you do want to, it has to go through all of the lawyers, adding in amendments, easy for me to say, or appendixes, and then it gets really confusing, really messy, and really quite complicated. So yeah, unfortunately, if you did want to eke out additional life cycle of that particular device or that particular asset, your hands are tied by the overall agreement for DaaS. I know a lot of organisations have already changed their life cycles because basic hardware is getting a lot better, more robust, more reliable, lasts longer. So people have changed maybe from a 3-year to a 4-year Windows, maybe from a 4 to a 5-year Apple devices, maybe from a 1 to a 2-year on the phones. They may have already done that. However, if that's something that you are considering, make sure you define that life cycle before you get involved in this contract because you won't be able to change it during it. So lack of flexibility in the overall life cycle element of it there, which can cause some problems for organisations. We go back as well to another con, is that contract complexity, understanding what you are responsible for and what the third party provider is responsible for. Think of it like a car hire, right? If you were on holiday, you rented out a car, or even at home, and you got a scratch on it, got a puncture, you returned it with some damage you didn't have beforehand, you put some extra miles on that you didn't expect to put on, or you returned it without a full fuel tank, then ultimately you typically have financial penalties. And it's the same in DaaS. If you're returning equipment too early, too late, in a bad condition, there are financial penalties that are typically built into that particular contract. ITAM needs to be aware of this. You absolutely need to be aware of this, because ultimately you're responsible for that equipment during its life cycle within your organization. Again, you can't outsource that responsibility, so you need to be aware and make sure that users, when they're getting the equipment, are looking after it even more so than they would perhaps than when you brought it outright. Because again, going back to that cost element of it, if a user returns a device and it's got scratches on it, it's got sticker damage on it, it's been returned back late because the user couldn't be bothered to come in and do a refresh, and you're getting penalised for that financially, builds up that cost, takes away some of the overall benefits from a financial standpoint of doing it. And suddenly when you go to renew your DaaS contract with a hardware provider, it's gone up X% because they know that your users are not quite as grown up as they should be and damaging equipment when they should be looking after it. So if you're doing a DaaS, you absolutely need to bring that responsibility over to the user and make sure that they know that they are accountable. So which types of organizations could benefit from device as a service? I personally think, and have seen it happen a lot, where there's a high turnover of staff, whether that's permanent or contractors, and that they're remote as well. It's really easy just to provision a device, go to the DaaS provider, the hardware vendor, and say, send one out to Steve, who's way up north or whatever. It doesn't come into the office. So much easier. Your local service desk don't have to get involved. They don't have to find stock, image it, tag it, etc. Comes straight from the DaaS provider. If you're looking for a quick and easy way to standardize your hardware fleet as well, or being forced to standardize your hardware fleet, this could be another option for you as well. This could be another primary candidate on how you can do that. And also, if you are a mature ITAM function, look, this could be a great thing to take your ITAM to the next level. If you've already got your asset management database sorted out, your CMDB sorted out as well, you've got all your processes and controls in place, DaaS could just be something brilliant to take you to that next level, to give you that flexibility within your organization, to do some hardware budgeting and financial wizardry by moving stuff from CapEx to OpEx. Could be an option for you. If you are an immature ITAM function with no processes or lifecycle management in place, do not go down the DaaS route. It will get you in even more of a mess than you probably already are. You need to be a bit more mature in order to do DaaS so that you can manage the lifecycle more effectively. And ultimately, very much like we would with SaaS, software as a service, internal audits to regulate and validate that these hardware that you're getting on a subscription model is being used and optimized becomes even more important, more frequent. How can you do that? With good data. If you've got bad data, don't even bother doing DaaS. Get the basics done first. Get your ITAM maturity going like that up, and then you can start to consider DaaS. People who should stay away from DaaS, people that want more flexibility on the life cycle, they'd like to add on an extra year or two during the cycle, or they only replace devices when they need to be replaced. Definitely avoid DaaS. If you're an organization that has highly customized or CTO, custom to order physical hardware devices, again, DaaS might not be the right solution for you. It may become way more expensive than if you purchased it outright. So I'd probably stick with buying them unless you're being forced to by your leadership team or senior management. And of course, if you are an organization that likes to hold a lot of stock within your stock rooms, you are going to end up, I know if you buy it outright, it's just depreciating in the stockroom, that kind of counts, but it feels like it hurts even more if you are on a DaaS model, if you do have localized stock that's just sat there for a bit. If you're more mature and you can pull down from a warehouse with the DaaS provider, the hardware vendor, then fine. But again, you are paying for things on a monthly basis. It is OpEx, so if it's not in use, it really does hurt from an ITAM perspective, way more than if you had just purchased it outright. And from an ITAM perspective, you still need that amazing asset management database with full life cycle and financial data in there as well. Because it's DaaS, it's even more important that you manage this so that you can track returns, you can track new devices coming into your environment. You're going to need all your life cycle management processes, all of your ITAM processes on board as well, because that's going to become even more important under a subscription model for your hardware equipment. Things go lost, things get missing. Your joiners, movers, levers process needs to be absolutely watertight, because if a lever walks off with a device that you're leasing, that's not even your device for them to take. It can get super messy. You need those really tight controls in place so that you can manage this, not only from an ITAM standpoint, but your local engineers that are on the ground as well, that are recovering devices from levers, that are giving out new devices to new starters, that are managing movers, etc. Yeah, your JML process needs to be absolutely nailed. And finally, One of the most important things to consider about DaaS is no IT asset disposition value at the end. You cannot resell it. You do not get any money back at the end of the life like you would if you owned it. Some people may say, well, that's fine because the convenience of sending it back. We'd rather the convenience than the money. Other people will say, no, we use a lot of that ITAD money so that we can integrate it back into our hardware budgets or for ITAM projects as a whole. So don't just think that it might be cheap initially because you've obviously got the OPEX cost instead of CAPEX and no ITAD value at the end. So when you're factoring all that in, is it actually cost effective? Is it cost optimal? Is it what we want to do? Please consider all of those in there. Really hope you found it useful. Please don't forget, check down there, like and subscribe so that you don't miss anything coming in the future here at the Sam Beast YouTube channel. And as always, until next time, happy ITAMing. Happy subscriptioning as a service in 2026, or not if it doesn't work for you.